So, welcome to our Mainstreet Masters series presented by Mainstreet SA. I'm David West, your host, and today we're talking to Shane Clarke, the first ever Director of Operations of VQ, previously the Victorian Court in Cork City Centre, Ireland. Shane was also previously CEO of Nano Nagle Place in Cork, and before that, the Deputy Director of Team London Bridge. Welcome, Shane, and thank you for your time today.
David, lovely to see you again.
Can you please tell us about the VQ and what attracted you to the director role?
Okay, so the VQ, previously the Victorian Quarter, to set the scene a little bit, Cork is a small city. It's considerably smaller than Adelaide, where you are, David. So maybe about a quarter of a million people. And on the north side of the city centre is an area which we now call the Victorian Quarter, which had been, certainly if you went back about 15 years ago, was sort of very run down. So lovely architecture, sort of lovely, sort of quite bohemian sort of neighborhood, but run down. It was a sort of place where you got a cab and a kebab. It was a place you sort of exited the city, and some really sort of entrepreneurial and passionate businesses came together probably about 15 years ago and formed what is now the Victorian Quarter in a very ad hoc way. It was businesses coming together and doing a bit of boosterism, and that sort of the area started to regenerate probably about 8 years ago when I came to Cork, and we started noticing a difference. And then they sort of formalized it and formed something which was the Victorian Quarter about 8 years ago on a voluntary basis. And then again, that was a success, and there was some new arrivals in the area. And then approximately 2.5 years ago, they decided to think, look, they're too busy to do this at the end of a very long day. And they decided, look, we'll get somebody else to do our bidding. I had just left Nano Nagle Place, the museum in Cork, and my background was regeneration. So for me, it was a sort of perfect partnership. I do happen to live up the road, but I knew the people. I knew they were passionate people. I knew they were really good business people, and I just liked particularly their optimism. They had. I remember there was a meeting when they came across the part of the city where Nano Nagle is, and a gentleman, Philip Gillivan, said, "Look, what we do is we're sort of very boosterish in public. We're very pro. We're very forward thinking. We're very positive, and we have our arguments or our quarrels, as there always will be, with the council behind closed doors." And I thought, in terms of my background, that is the way to go. So if you can coalesce a group of people and then actually subscribe to a forward-thinking vision for the future, that is the fundamental, I think, of regeneration. So it was for that reason I sort of threw my hat in the ring. They cast out a role, and I said, "Look, I think I could do something interesting for you."
Okay. And I see that, and of course, you've got experience in the green environment. And I see that one of the focuses you've got there at the VQ is a green environment. So how are you putting some of those steps in place, and how's that going?
The base is, it's a very urban area, so in although it's a small city, it's a very urban area of Cork. So it does stretch back before the Victorian area, but it's essentially a sort of Victorian, almost like one of the first sort of Victorian suburbs. So it's very, very built up. There is no formal green space. There's very little trees. And one of the principles, and I would stress it was a principle that we agreed, is that we would really be to the fore in terms of urban greening. So we would, like, sustainability as many elements, but actually the urban greening side of things, the softening side of things, was something that people wanted to see. So the way we're constituted is we're a member-only organisation. So the funds are, unlike, say, for example, a business improvement district, the funds are limited in that regard. But we've had some success in terms of pitching in for funding and doing greening projects. So we've done a couple of gardens. We've done a whole series of planters. We run a green network, so green in all shades of green, sustainability through to urban greening. So it's sort of the direction of travel. I won't tell you that we've changed the world on that side, but I think we've changed the conversation.
And I was going to say that your previous roles in Nano Nagle Place and in Team London Bridge, of course, had a very strong green theme going through both those locations. So how has that sort of helped? Has it helped a lot?
Well, I think I mean, there is a direct parallel to Team London Bridge, which is in London Bridge in London. For those that don't know it, it just sits outside the city. It's got a little bit of sort of the West End vibe, and it's got a little bit of the city vibe, but it's also a very old and actually traditionally very poor part of London. And that's one of the things I think that I'm most proud that we did in my sort of tenure there, and certainly it's been taken forward by the people who work there now, is that we really majored on greening a very grey neighborhood. I mean, it was very, very, very grey. And we, I think, became rightly known as one of the most innovative sort of practitioners in terms of urban greening. So whether it's green walls or green meadows in terms of tree planting, in terms of planters, in terms of sustainable urban drainage. So I think that's something I took over here. In terms of Nano Nagle Place, an enclave, an old convent, a very, very beautiful place with gardens in it. And I think, it's just the human thing of translating or seeing the potential in grey spaces to be green and beautiful. Because that's, it's a human thing. People love them. You've got a lovely backdrop there. People come to places of beauty. And I think it's a conversation we don't have enough in the sort of the urban territory. The beauty is fundamental to our enjoyment of cities and towns.
And I was going to say, when you were at Nano Nagle Place, it was sort of a very historical location. And so, how did you use that in your marketing and promotional activity to promote the uniqueness of it?
Well, look, so I there had been Nano Nagle Place was a common on about sort of 3.5 acres. It had essentially been derelict for a number of years. There had been two schools there. There had been a thriving community of young people there. There had been a convent there with up to 30 sisters at one stage, and that had whittled down to three sisters sitting in a series of very beautiful but very rundown buildings. There was a major regeneration project, an investment project, to take that back to being a museum, to being a live community. And then I was sort of handed the key for this treasure. And I'm not a person of faith. I came to this role, but it became very apparent that in terms of our telling the story, we had to be true to its roots. So those roots were the sisters, the schools, the history, the buildings, and we tell that through the museum, but we told it through the grounds, we told it through the shop, we told it through the way we did retail, we told it through our community projects. And I think it does resonate with what we're doing over in the VQ, is that we're telling that story, or we're articulating that story about the history of the place. People, love to know where the place comes from, where its genesis is, and also very, very importantly that it's a living history. So this wasn't history as a sort of a dead history. This was history as something that was continuing. So the ethos and the philosophy of the sisters, going back through education, going back through care, going back through community, going back through the maintenance and living in these lovely environments. It was that living history that we made present. Now that's something I'm very passionate about doing here in the VQ as well.
And of course, Nano was a nun who had an amazing history and had done so much outreach work. And of course, what you did in Nano Nagle Place was actually to put into or sort of underpin the commercial aspect by putting in a couple of sustainable food outlets. And I know that when we went there, it was just fantastic, into the Good Day Deli and the Nadir Deli. So how's that work? Does that work well to back it up?
Part of what I was handed over was this beautiful sort of Miesian pavilion in the gardens. And we had to put it out to tender. And so we put it out. We had sort of 10 responses, and we whittled it down to 5 serious responses, and we asked them to come forward. And Good Day Deli, Claire Condon and our partner were one of the applicants. Now, they had never run a restaurant. They had experience in the hospitality sector, primarily from New Zealand, where Mac is from. So Claire's from Cork, and Mac is from New Zealand. But they came with a prospectus and a business plan that was really quite inspirational. It was very, very heavily based on the sustainability of the food and the offer. So the provenance of the food, educating about food, and sort of the global consequences of the diet sort of that we eat. Their aesthetic, their graphics were extraordinarily sort of funky and sort of forward thinking. And I think that's one of the things that really made and continues to make Nano Nagle a success, is that we've combined sort of 18th century and actually, a conservative sort of background in a way. It's mostly conservative, but with a very funky sort of approach to life, to community, to graphics, and so on and so forth. Those guys won a tender, very heavily based on the food that they brought up to the judges on the tender, because it was so delicious. But actually, it turned out to be probably the biggest, or one of the biggest successes that we had. And I think it was that marriage of real quality, really, really quality. I think in this world, you're either really blooming good or you're really cheap, and they're blooming good. And their philosophy that matched with ours about community and sustainability and so on and so forth. To get to Good Day Deli, Nano Nagle Place is in a slightly out of the way corner of the city, and then you have to traverse across a landscape to get there. So you really do, if you're coming for lunch, you really have to make a decision. I am going there. It's not like you're popping into town and go, where would I go? Here, there, and the other way. And I think actually, in retrospect, if we'd given it to a not a bog standard cafe, we'd approaches from some very reputable and lovely sort of cafes in the city. But I think unless we were exceptional, and they are exceptional, it wouldn't have worked. And then they opened up a satellite in the front courtyard, which is doing very well as well. So I think it was that mixture of quality and alignment of philosophy, the way they go about things in terms of their sustainability that just fit. It didn't. It was a lovely jigsaw fit. It didn't run against the grain of what we were trying to do.
I think it's a really good lesson for Main Streets too, is to always have an open mind, and you obviously were sort of looking, well, what can we do here? Let's give these guys a go, because they've actually got a very solid business plan, and like I say, consistent with what you're trying to do. So when you just going back to Team London Bridge, when you were there, of course, you had many programs that were running in the public spaces, and I know you had a big emphasis on clean, safe, and attractive. Um, so one of the recent programs that I saw was the which started going back in around 2015, 2016, was the Fresh Air Squares, and um, I thought that was fascinating how you've integrated that into the program there in the public space. Can you tell us a bit more about how that happened?
So Fresh Air Squares. I think I delivered a couple, and then my colleagues took the baton and delivered some more. Was a parklet. So the idea was basically to win back some green space by taking away two car spaces and doing something green and lovely. And I think I'd seen some nice examples in America, but at the time there was none in the UK or London. Although a good friend of mine was sort of running one, unbeknownst to me, parallel over in Hackney. And what we decided to do was to run a competition. So we got some really good people involved in the competition. I think the Architectural Association were involved, the Mayor's office was involved, the council was involved, and we brought in Transport for London, who actually own the street. You have to get a permission. And we ran a competition. We put out a brief, and it was like 20,000 English pounds, so 40,000 Australian dollars there, and come up with a design and sort of sent it out into the world, and then sat there thinking, is anyone going to be interested to reply? And we had 50 responses. I mean, it was just knocked out, and the quality was just unbelievable. And the other thing that we did was quite innovative, was that we ran so it was a competition. So we did an exhibition, and we displayed all the entries, and then we whittled it down to three, and we ran an architectural crit, so whereby you bring in judges, and we brought in architectural judges and ecological judges to criticize the designers, and we did this in a public forum. So the process actually was almost as interesting as the final result. It was won by a very young practice from Liverpool, who came up with this just beautiful piece of beautiful furniture, and that was married with, we had a greening contractor that we used, and they married together and came up with something that was really quite stunning. And I think, again, going back to what I said earlier about quality, you see planters all over the world, and you see some in Cork now, and they're pretty prosaic, shall I say. But this was something of beauty. It got into, the Design Bible Design. That's how much people loved it. And then we did other iterations of it around the city. So I think it did greening, it did process, it did conversation, it did design, it did beauty, and it was a gift back to the public realm. So I think the whole process was as important as the final result, actually.
I think if you're looking at the photos, you can actually see how you've managed to fit them into very narrow spaces and some quite awkward spots and create something. It's really impressive.
Yeah, I think that I had a background in urbanism before. I'd worked for the city of Westminster, and I'd done sort of the normal sort of clean, green, and safe stuff. The joy about working for Team London Bridge was to be given the freedom and the wherewithal to actually get into the green urbanism agenda and to get into the sort of creative urbanism agenda and work with, it was me working with brilliant people. I was allowed to commission brilliant people. And I would certainly say that creativity and imagination and those conversations is just essential to whether it's Adelaide or Sydney or London Bridge or Cork. And it just opens up conversation and brings people out of their houses and their shops to talk about things in a way that it energizes them and excites them.
Mm.
So yeah, no, I'm very proud of that project.
Well, I think another area of your business plan and the strategy in Team London Bridge was actually looking at the four different character areas. So, how did you develop those areas so they're a bit unique and then sort of develop their own identity?
Well, I think for the listeners, if I can maybe describe London Bridge, so it's always sort of sat outside the city of London, and it's dominated by London Bridge Station. So 16 rail lines coming in, a huge beast of a station, and it was sort of set up and above the local environment, such that you had railway arches, and those railway arches stretch miles and miles and miles. You could sort of see them from space. It was sort of the Great Wall of London Bridge. So it divided the regenerating riverfront, which was becoming a bit of the city of London, from the old sort of working class Bermondsey, and particularly an area that was still marked, what would it be 60 years hence, still marked by sort of bomb sites and derelict sites. And actually, the riverfront sort of took care of itself in a way. That was where the shiny stuff went. That's where the very major, £1 billion investment went. That's where the riverfront went. But one of the things we were very keen to do was, green that side. Certainly bring a greening side to it, but also actually embrace this structure that was the arches, because they are majestic. They're sort of a utilitarian Victorian sort of great pyramids of London. So actually, we started having a conversation. Actually, how can we embrace them? How can we actually turn these arches from being warehousing into restaurants, into bars, into theatres, and so on and so forth, and then open up the back, and particularly Bermondsey Street, which is now an astoundingly interesting street. Some of the best restaurants and cafes and sort of art. So I think a lot of our approach to the different areas of London Bridge were about knitting them together, and a lot of that was actually through creativity, through art, through greening, and through inhabiting them with different things. So we did an urban allotment with homeless people, for example. We did a massive sort of linear park and an old theatre that was a very grey space. We did a pop-up sort of a museum and some of the arches and so on and so forth. We did lighting projects. A lot of this is in collaboration. One of the marvelous things about London is that there is or was money, and there are some really interesting people to work with. So it was a very, I think, sort of entrepreneurial and creative way that we came together or brought other people together on that side.
You also had a focus on culture. I just wondered how are you bringing some of the cultural lessons from Team London Bridge into VQ for what you're doing now?
Well, look, London is a world city. It's blessed with some of the greatest and most interesting sort of cultural institutions in the world. Even in London Bridge, off the top of my head, with the old operating theatre, we've now got the Science Gallery. There's the London Bridge Theatre. We've got White Cube Gallery. I could actually go on, and that's only in a tiny corner of London. So we're in an embarrassment of riches over there. I think part of our job was really to sort of link them together and get them all sort of talking together. I run a consultancy called Garden City Culture, and I think that those three elements are key to a city. Garden is the greening side of the city. City is the urban side of the city. The small knit sort of plots, the differentiation, the street culture, the liveliness of the city. It can't just be an out of town retail park in a heritage environment. It's got to have culture. It's got to have people living there. It's got to have amenities and has transport and so on. And the other part is culture. And I think that that's what's always alongside administration and sort of power, culture has always defined cities. And last night I had a very lovely experience. Last night is I went to the launch of the Cork International Film Festival, which was hosted in the Everyman Theatre. Next week I'm off to the Graffiti Theatre launch, which is a very small community theatre up the way. We want the VQ, which does not have the assets that London Bridge has, to become a base for creative people and for creative institutes. One of the ways we're doing that is very heavily getting behind festivals. So we were involved in Cork on a Fork. We did a long table on the street to celebrate Cork sort of gastronomic sort of excellence. Film festival last night. There's a whiskey festival next year. So we want to bring. There's a redevelopment of the docks, and we would love to see cultural investment down there. So it's we're pointing in that direction. You know, we have some treasures, and we've some historic treasures, and we tell that story as well. But the argument that I'm sort of putting center alongside the greening for the VQ is actually culture has to be central to the success of the name I'm going for.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think some of the programs you're working on are amazing. And if you want to find out more about the VQ, just log online to the vq.ie, or Nano Nagle Place is nanonagleplace.ie. And then the Fresh Air Squares, if you look up teamlondonbridge.co.uk/fresh air squares, and you'll have a look at that exciting concept. So thank you, Shane, for your amazing insights and your help for Main Street people in South Australia and Australia who are looking at these interviews. And we really appreciate your time, and good luck with the VQ for the future.
David, listen, you're very welcome. I have a very fond memory of spent probably a month in Adelaide back in the, what, 98 or something. So hopefully I'll actually get to see you in person at some stage over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that'd be really good. So thank you very much again, and we'll catch up with you soon.